Well, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. It is 9:31, in fact. Thank y'all for being here. It's a beautiful day, chilly, but glad for y'all being here today. Um, we're still in the study of Ecclesiastes, at least for a couple of weeks, including today. So today's topic is going to be chapter 12, verses 1 through 8 of Ecclesiastes. Not a lot of verses there, but there's a lot of information for us to look at. And as we go through it, you're going to be thinking, oh my word, I came out here to listen to Solomon talk about this. But it's okay. There's a path through this and some positivity once we come out of it. So if you will, look at your device or your Bible. Look at Ecclesiastes 12. We're going to read the first 5 verses initially. And this first verse you're going to recognize pretty quickly, right? Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of trouble come and the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark and the clouds return after the rain, when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, when the grinders cease because they are few and those looking through the windows grow dim, when the doors to the street are closed and the sound of grinding fades, when men rise up at the sound of birds, but all their songs grow faint, when men are afraid of heights and of dangers in the streets, when the almond tree blossoms and the grasshopper drags himself along, and the desire no longer is stirred, then man goes to his eternal home and mourners go about the streets. So what's Solomon talking about here? Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah, Peggy says that kind of describes us sometimes. Like, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. And he goes about talking about aging somewhat. And before the evil days come, that's really a reference to perhaps the King James Version. We'll say that. Talk about that. We're looking at NIV here, so it's more of the days of our youth compared to the aging process. And I started off here. It says, getting older is not for sissies. Sheila and I use that reference. If you'll see what she's looking at in her boot, it definitely is not for sissies as we get older. As we wake up in the morning with pains and groans as we get older, it's like, where did that come from? What's going on? So getting older is definitely not for sissies. It's not something we want to do, but everybody does, right? We all get older. Ogden Nash, the great writer, said, middle age is when you have met so many people that every new person you meet reminds you of someone else. It's so true. So if you think about it, we start aging at the point we are conceived. At the point of conception, we're already starting to age, if you really want to get technical about it. And if you think about it, when you talk to scientists and people in the medical field, they'll tell you that we kind of peak in the adolescent years, and maturity is achieved, at least physically, between the age of 25 and 35. When you see athletes like in the playoffs yesterday and today, you think about that age group that they're in, and that's really where they are, between that age of 25 and 35. So with the average lifespan being 70, guess where middle age is? It's simple math, right? About 35. So here I am, in my late 50s thinking, well, I'm middle age. No, I'm not. No, not from a scientific standpoint. And that's why you can think, oh, well, thanks, Charles. I need to know that. There's a technical term called senescence. Basically, that means that's the downhill part. So we peak. Our primary performance years, 25 to 35, and then from there it's downhill, right? That's where we have maximum function until we start declining through the process that eventually we all face, and that's death. Ecclesiastes 12:1 we talked about says, remember God before the evil days come. Really, that means the more difficult days or the days where we have more trouble. So as we read, how does Solomon describe aging? We see in verse 2, it's the fading of life. We have storms. Verses 3 and 4, these are all visualizations. An estate which was thriving and bustling. We can, think of our house with a lot of stuff going on, and then it just gets quiet, falls in disrepair. I imagine Solomon's looking around the palace and thinking the same thing as it relates to his life. Verse 5 is interesting. It has references that maybe we can't, translate real well, but for Solomon's day, it does. With the almond tree, those are figurative descriptions. The almond tree, when the blossoms are white, okay, that's kind of leads to graying of one's hair. You imagine a grasshopper just bouncing around, right? And eventually slows down as it ages. And Solomon says, yeah, that's kind of like me when I was young. I was bouncing around, and now I'm getting slow and old. Caperberry is a type of plant. It was used as an aphrodisiac, and Solomon says it has no effect now. And verse 5, he has reference to an eternal home, and there's mourners in the street, and that's referencing to what? Perhaps a funeral procession, right? Verse 6 is an interesting alliteration. A golden bowl on a silver cord, the shattered pitcher, the broken wheel. All these are illustrations to Solomon about his life and getting older. In verse 7, talking about how the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. In verse 8, NIV is everything is meaningless. Perhaps you're more familiar with the other version. Vanity of vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Everything is meaningless. We see that reference throughout Ecclesiastes with Solomon. When he's saying everything is meaningless, is everything he has created, built up, all his power, all his glory, all his might, all his wealth, his fame, it's all meaningless. In the first 8 verses of chapter 12, we see what he's talking about is the aging process, how that's compared to what he has. And he ends up in verse 8 saying everything is meaningless. Okay, here's where I said, hang on. Okay, it's going to get a little bit better. We're not going to talk about negativity, about, we're getting old. We know that, all right? Perhaps we didn't think about, we start aging from the point of conception or where middle age really is. But his purpose is not to make us depressed, okay? He's trying to create an action to motivate us, okay, to get us to move forward, to perhaps think in a different paradigm, okay, than we have been. Certainly that he's talking to himself. So remembering God does not only mean thinking about him, but to let him into our lives fully in every way before old age sets in. That's what Solomon's talking about. Why is he talking about that? Why does he start off in verse 1 saying, remember your Creator in the days of your youth, and then start talking about the aging process? Because we owe him the strength of our youth. Even now, we look at our youth, however many years, decades ago that was. He says we still have an opportunity to remember him as we should have in our youth. Verse 7, you'll see that he says that God is our Creator, and our spirit will return to him. He created us, right? And where are we going to end up? Back with him. He says our Our lives are gifts from God, and we should be stewards of our lives, as we see in other verses, of money and of the earth. We're told to be good stewards of the earth, right, and our livelihood and our money. He's telling us to be good stewards of our lives as well. When we talk about first fruits, what was that in reference to? What did Israelites, what did they always do? Right. Steve said back in the days when the Hebrews, when they produced their grains and their fruits, the first fruits were given to God sacrificially in honor of Him for taking care of them. And so we're supposed to be giving our first fruits, which are our lives, to God first and foremost, not the leftovers. So when we have that mindset, remember God, our Creator, when we're young, it keeps old age from being worse than it has to be. Solomon says, remember your Creator in the days of your youth. We know that our lives are formed, pathways, how we're guided through our life. A lot of that can be formed when we're young, right? Habits can be formed, career paths, things we do. A lot of that can be formed when we're young. That's where it's very crucial to make sure our youth understand that, because a lot of what we end up being is determined during that age. And we know that we can sometimes just kind of set aside God. You know, when He says, remember in the age of our youth, maybe we did, but we got away from that. And people who intentionally wait to remember, like, I'll start doing that. I'll start thinking about God. I'll start acting like I should. I'll start attending worship when the time's right, when I can do that. Sadly, sometimes we never achieve that, right? Because we don't know when death will come. Right. Yeah. Very good. Steve referenced, like Jesus, He knew when He was 12 years old what He needed to be doing, compared to some of us when in our youth, did we absolutely do that all the time? The general rule in human nature, we can all relate to it, is we just kind of postpone things, right? You heard the word procrastinate. Perhaps we do that with our spiritual life as well. We just kind of put it off. And the longer we put things off, what happens? It becomes easier, right? And it becomes easier, and it becomes harder also to actually do that. Okay? Right. The more excuses we make, we can continue that path instead of doing what we know we should be doing. Waiting, especially when dealing with our relationship with God, can only be dangerous, but moreover have eternal consequences. All right? We know having a great relationship and closeness to God our Father and Jesus, just the blessings that we achieve with that. But by putting it off, right, not doing what we should be doing, is not just postponing those blessings, but can have consequences of an eternal nature too, and it's very serious. Commentator said old age can be a time of peaceful satisfaction or of deep regret. And by that, having a good relationship with God, it can be a great peaceful time because we have blessings, we know Old age is not for sissies, but we can deal with it. We can handle it. We know who's taking care of us. Or it can be a polar opposite of that. It can be a time of personal regret. The inevitable conclusion is, we all know, it's death. Verse 5 says, then people go to their eternal home. It's just a matter of fact. Solomon recognized that. Now, this go is important. In Hebrew, that is a participle that means a process, a constant, continuous dissolution. It is not like we go, okay, automatically, we're gone. Solomon recognized, as we were talking about, this is the aging process. Okay? So it's a continuous process until that time, we don't know when it is, actually happens. So that go is of special meaning. Death is the climax of a process which begins in life, and it cannot be reversed. So we all heard it said, what? Nothing in life is guaranteed, right? We've heard it said a lot of times. But part of that is nothing in life is guaranteed is we don't know when our time has come. We don't know when we're going to achieve that old age, however we define that. Okay, if middle age is 25 to 35 and 70, okay, it could be longer. But we don't know that. We don't know when that's going to happen. We're not guaranteed any of that. In reference, you can look at the New Testament, Hebrews 9:27 and 2 Corinthians 5:10. C.S. Lewis, one of our great writers, who actually I believe was initially, when he was in England, was an atheist and he was converted. He wrote there are only two kinds of people in the end, those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, in the end, thy will be done. All that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. No soul that seriously and constantly desires joy will ever miss it. Those who seek, find. To those who knock, it is open. What do you gather from that? Yeah. Sister Peggy said, be careful what we choose to do. Says it's self-choice. We have two paths we can take. And that's what Solomon was referring to. Remember our Creator in the days of our youth. Remembering God in our youth means we must do it now without delay. It's past time to start. Without delay. It's past time. Commentator said it's not now's the time. That time is gone. We should have been doing that from youth. But if not, then it's past time. We need to figure it out. We'll never be younger. Okay? The maturation process, the decline is ongoing. And the evil days, the days of trouble, are upon us. They're either here already or they're going to be here. And as Lewis said, we need to choose joy for ourselves, both now and for eternity. It's something that we absolutely need to be looking at. And it says in chapter 3, turn to God before you reach a joyless point in life, and how real joy comes with a communion and relationship with God. Any thoughts?
For the evil days, it means that they're more difficult than trials, but the reason because of that is the evil that humans did at the very beginning because that wasn't God's plan, was for us to get older and have these hardships. And so, because of our evil, these evil days, trials and hardships will come.
Right. Melissa said it. We can also look at that as the hardships that we have in life. The evil days that are upon us, how we can kind of look at that and figure out that that's can be better.
Had sin not entered into the world, then the consequences of sin, which ultimately lead to death,
Right.
would not have occurred.
Yeah. Yeah. And jumping ahead, they have a lesson on that next week. You see in verse 13, as a follow-up, there's some verses in between there, but here's the conclusion of the matter: fear God and keep His commandments. Kind of jumping ahead this is the whole duty of man. God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether good or evil. So as we go into our aging process, he tells us that to fear God and keep His commandments. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder for next week, but we should be thinking about that. That's the thing that we should be looking at when it comes down to it. As C.S. Lewis said, we should choose joy for ourselves, both now and for eternity. But the whole conclusion of the matter is that fear God, meaning we should have a right relationship with God, and understand that we don't know when our time is come. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we fall ill and gets into a terminal point. We know it's coming, but a lot of times we don't. And even in Solomon's days, we're going back a couple of millennia, is that he recognized that too. Is that he didn't know when his time was done. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. Everything is meaningless. With everything he created, all his empire building, he realized he was getting older and what he needed to do. And that's what he was writing about. Any comments, Charles? Mm-hmm. Okay, right. Charles said that old age, getting older can be full of grace, can be beautiful, can be full of joy. But what it comes down to is that relationship with God to make it that way. Right.
And we have the hope of today.
Right.
Well, I think that's the sense of what Paul said in 2 Corinthians when he's talking about today is the day of salvation.
Right.
Today is the day that matters. In that sense, the past, with all of its regrets, like I say, all of us have, we can put that behind us and live for today for Him. That's where the hope comes in.
Yeah. Steve's talking about the tension that's created in life, the pain and regret versus the hope. And that hope is in Christ. And we know, we may have experienced it or know of people that have that pain and regret because they do not know Christ. They don't have that right relationship. And they just look backwards without knowing that today can be the day if they act upon it. And that's where Solomon says we don't know when our time is. That we cannot predict that. And it can have eternal consequences if we're not careful. A few short verses, but there's a lot packed in there. Some real sobering information in there. But, as we said, Solomon wasn't trying to depress us, disappoint us, create anxiety. He's trying to give us could be a tough life lesson about what we face and what we need to do. Instead of have that pain of regret in our lives, we can have that joy by having that right relationship. Charles? Awesome. Brother Charles said, no sermon is complete without a quote from C.S. Lewis, from one of his fellow professors. So I'm glad I could follow along in Professor Ash's words about that. I love C.S. Lewis. All right, that was a lot of information. It's not quite 10 o'clock yet. That's all I have. Does anybody have anything else? A few quick verses, but like I said, a lot of information in there. A lot to dwell on and think about. So I'm going to let you go and just have fellowship, and then we'll get together for worship here in a little bit. Thank y'all so much. Have a great, blessed day.